good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, New York. I hope everything's going well for you. I'm Guillaume Carlier, the Propel Head of Content and Innovation. I'm really happy to be here today. It's been actually more than a month, so I'm sure you know the format of our daily talks quite well, but just a really quick reminder, it's every day 4 p.m. Paris time, or 10 a.m. for New Yorkers today. One or several speakers presenting a topic for 20 minutes, and then the 10 minutes Q&A when you take the control. Basically, it's the bottom of your screen, you can find the Q&A button and all the questions you want. So today, I'm actually more than happy to receive Roelof Opperman. So Roelof is a managing director for Fifth Wall, and really happy to be with you today. I hope you can hear me well. Roelof, are you here? Looks like you are. Perfect.
I'm here.
Great. Thank you very much for being with us. It's a really big honor today. I know you're going to talk about the technology's roles for this kind of post-COVID period for real estate. So please, the mic is yours.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for MIPIM and Propel for inviting myself and Fifth Wall. We've always had a great relationship, and happy to take some time and give you our thoughts. So today I thought I'd give you kind of what we're seeing out there in the market in terms of technology that is either about to be implemented or implemented as people get back to work, get back to shopping, get back to semi-regular lives. Obviously, I don't think any of us think that we're going to be back to normal in a very long time. And so that's why we call it technology and the new normal. Post-COVID. And so what I'll do is I'll take you through some of the very practical things we are seeing in different segments. Mostly this is being applied at the office, multifamily, and retail level. I'm not going to go into as much logistics. And then also at the end, I'll talk about general themes we are seeing in prop tech or real estate technology investing. Just to give you a little background on Fifth Wall, we're the largest venture capital firm in the world. Focused on prop tech, about $1 billion under management, and most of our LPs are big owners and operators in real estate. So let's jump in. So, you know, there's probably about several themes we're seeing or individual sectors that are starting to break out in terms of how people are implementing technology. And we actually personally believe, and our partners do too, that technology is going to play a vital role in getting us back to the office, getting us back to the retail centers and you know, making sure that we're safe in the homes we live in. The first is a very practical one where it's kind of more low tech, which is de-densification of spaces. Obviously, this is going to be a big thing. You're going to see some very low tech implementations, tape on the floor, etc. But then also some space planning tools that software does provide some support for. So that is obviously something that office owners and operators are looking at. How do we continue to maintain the physical distancing, the 6-foot rule within an office, particularly within shared workspaces where there was an increased density before COVID-19. Certainly the second kind of area we've seen is a real hyper focus on digitizing operations. And we've seen this in a few areas. I think the first is just in tenant engagement management. You know, essentially before you started seeing a lot of real estate firms look at tenant engagement apps, now we've seen that adoption really take off. And part of that initially is just the communication to tenants. And I think increasingly that those tools are going to be important as people get back into the workspace, knowing what they can do, what can't they do. And in addition, just really communicating with them everything you're doing at the building level. Because a lot of getting back to work, in addition to the practical side of it and maintaining physical distancing, it's also going to be the psychological side of it, where people need to feel safe in the workspaces, safe in the retail outlets, safe in the malls. And so that communication of telling them what you're doing, what they can do and can't do, is going to be really, really important. Obviously, we've seen a lot of advancement in artificial artificial reality or virtual reality. Or augmented reality or virtual reality, 3D. You're seeing a lot of virtual tours, augmented tours. It's increased quite a bit, but probably not as much as people have thought, partly because obviously there's been some moratoriums on site visits, and the brokerage community has slowed down, whether it's residential or commercial, but you have seen a lot more adoption of that particular technology. I would say, the revenue generating processes where software can be involved, you've definitely seen an uptick in that, whether it's kind of digital closings, so remote notarizations, closings on mortgages remotely. You're seeing a lot of those tools get increase in penetration as people look at, how do we close a real estate transaction or a home closing without being physically present. And so I think you're seeing a lot of those technologies being adopted right now. And then I would say, obviously, occupancy sensors are going to be a very big thing. I think landlords and retail landlords as well are going to look at, okay, how much density are we getting in our space? How do we make sure that if it's too dense or there's too many people in the store, we can, kind of control that flow? I think that's going to be really important because it's very hard for a person to sit at a screen and notice that. Machines are much better at processing. They're much better at this analysis. And so you're going to see a lot of those sensors get installed, and a lot of those companies are getting engagement right now. Obviously, safety and hygiene are going to be really, really important. This is an airborne disease, and so we are seeing a lot of interaction in air quality technology, whether that be hardware and sensors. This is a disease that and a virus that spreads, via the air, and so HVAC systems, filtration systems are going to be vitally important, to make sure that they're top quality and that you have the latest tools and technology to make sure you're keeping your occupants safe. I would also say that touchless access is definitely something that people are looking at. We're seeing a lot of engagement on that. Again, people are concerned about touching surfaces and then potentially touching their face and contracting the disease. So anything touchless is going to be very much something landlords are looking at. I would also say that, the cleaning solutions, cleaning is going to be incredibly intense. We're seeing some reports in Asia where landlords are cleaning every 2 hours. Part of that is psychological, so that the tenants can see that the places are being cleaned. Part of it is also obviously just what they need to do to make sure that the place is clean and that no one contracts the virus. It's going to be very hard from a labor solutions to do all the cleaning purely with human labor. I think you're going to need a lot of robotic assistance, and this is a real interesting time for robotic startups, particularly in cleaning, to really rise now, and for landlords and also operators to start thinking about, whether it's worth that upfront investment for the types of robotic solutions that are out there. Obviously now with the expense of having, so much cleaning, the upfront investment actually in some cases really looks worth it because the payback period is going to be so much quicker. So you have this kind of magical period for, and I'm going to talk about that later, automation and robotics, particularly in cleaning. Certainly security technology, we're seeing a lot of that has to do with sensors, it has to do with access control, it has to do with software running computer vision programs. Obviously, that's going to be really important, whether it's counting the amount of people that are coming into your place or making sure that you know who's coming into your place. It'll be also interesting. Some people are looking at technology for temperature reading, kind of almost what we would term kind of remote temperature reading, where it does it automatically as you walk into a building, as opposed to a person standing there. It'll be interesting to see how far it goes in other countries. Certainly in Asia, we're seeing that technology being deployed. We think it'll probably be deployed in Europe and America too. It just depends on whether people want to put the time and money into solutions like that when that particular thing may be more short-term than others. Certainly, this is a very interesting time for cities to rethink mobility. We're seeing that in large cities like New York, London, Paris, where people actually like not having as much traffic, like not having as many cars on the road. And in addition, you have the issue where you're going to have a lot less ability for public transportation to move people around because of the physical distancing. I was talking to one major transportation network in a really large city and in Europe, and they were telling me that, you know, they're going to be able to have basically 1/7 of the ridership. So 6/7 of the people that used to ride on those transportation systems need to find another way to get to work. And so what we're seeing is actually cities, I think in an impressive way, stepping up, working with alternative mobility solutions. This can be electric scooters, electric bikes, and then also, you know, converting a lot of roads that potentially were cars into these new solutions. So it'll be really fascinating to see how that all plays out, how long those trends move. But my sense is that cities have a real opportunity to reset a lot of the infrastructure that was built before. And then I think a practical thing that deals with transport in a lot of buildings is just is going to be, you know, package management, right? So I think that you know, it's always been a big issue for office buildings with congestion downtown, with multifamily buildings certainly, and people are very worried about this package that has been in sometimes dozens of locations by the time it hits you. Who's touched it? Does it have the virus on it? Is it clean? I think you're going to see a lot of interesting solutions there, and a lot of people are reaching out on those particular realms or in those particular areas. So those are the very specific areas we're seeing tech be adopted. We're seeing landlords look. We think you'll see a lot of the solutions as you go back to work, as you go back to shopping, as you go back to, hopefully at some point we can go back to restaurants. And those are the particular kind of applications we're seeing to give you real practical solutions. The themes, I think, if you step back for a second, you know, as an investor myself, there's kind of three main themes we're seeing that I think are very important for people to realize in this particular sector. I think one is that digitalization is priority number one for almost everybody. Obviously, tech was rising a lot in real estate. You were seeing a lot of people pay attention to technology. Obviously, Fifth Wall is part of that. But now, you know, it's everyone's priority. Every single landlord out there is focusing on technology, focusing on digitalization. All of them have it as priority number one, which is really, really interesting. So I think that presents a particular opportunity for a lot of people in the space. Number two is this is really going to be the moment for data and analytics startups to show their power. You are seeing in kind of restricted places in the past, like Europe and even some parts of America, people are saying, you know what, let's put those data privacy concerns to the side. We need to make sure our citizens are safe. And they're really opening up the ability for a lot of startups to use data in a very powerful way. And I think it's kind of incumbent upon venture capitalists, investors, and also startups and technologists to show people the power you can have by sharing some of the data and how it can be protected. And so, you know, it's really going to be a magical moment if you like big data and analytics, because it's really going to be able to help people in a big way. My sense is that the restrictions are going to be lifted quite a bit. And so again, people really need to take that opportunity to show the power of it. And then I think the last thing is really going to be big, which is just the huge advancements in automation and robotics. I think we're going to see over the next, 6 to 12 months. It is almost physically impossible to do a lot of the cleaning, a lot of the maintenance. We're going to have likely some labor shortages because obviously people are afraid to go to work, and that's appropriate. So you're going to see the payback periods on that upfront investment for certain robotic solutions really pay off. And robots, again, can't get the virus. So they're wonderful workers in this particular sense. I think you're going to see huge advancements of that. I really do think in this realm, we believe that you're really going to see 5 to 10 years of tech penetration in real estate happen within a year or two. And so, yes, obviously it's a rough time out there for everybody. It doesn't matter what realm you're in of real estate. It's a tough time. But I think you're going to see huge advancements in our sector over the next year. So anyway, that's a little bit about the themes and a little bit about what we're seeing out there. And I'm happy to open up to questions.
Thank you very much, Rollof. That's perfect. We already have some questions. The first one from Sona, which before the COVID, everyone was focused on the smart building tech, all these IoT things. But COVID showed that finally analyzing human behavior is much more important, especially in commercial real estate. What do you think about that big change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, we always had trouble with the term smart building because no one really knows what that is. But yes, I think technology in buildings is certainly, a lot of people were confused in terms of the practical applications of it. Okay, why would I want to know the density of my office? Why would I want to know how people use an office? Well, that data just became extremely relevant. And so I think that certainly there's a big opportunity for that. I think it's going to be incumbent on landlords and startups and technologists to think beyond COVID as well. So yes, you're going to have implementation of these sensors, likely implementation of a lot of this technology. But if your technology is just for COVID, that's not a long-term business model, right? At some point, we will get through this period. And so once that happens, what is your value prop? So I really think if you're getting the engagement now, it's really incumbent on you, yes, to show the immediate success that you're going to have and the immediate ROI to the particular landlord, to the particular retail landlord. But I think you have to have a long-term vision as well, because if all you're going to do is just help them in the short term, that's great, but it's not going to help them in the long term. And so I think you have to have that long-term mindset.
Thank you, Roelof. Even if I think you already stepped a bit in this during your presentation, but Agnès would like to know how do you think the prop tech can really help concretely the return to the everyday business?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it. I would say that some are going to be much more important than others. I think air quality is going to be vital, just from a practical standpoint. I think that the things that are likely easier to implement and cheaper, that give you a real psychological boost, I think we're going to start seeing that. And a lot of this is going to be trial and error. I don't think anybody knows how exactly it's going to play out. But I think that the psychology is something that we shouldn't underestimate as people get back in the office. And that's going to be very, very important. So you will see some very advanced tech solutions like the robotics, et cetera. Then you're going to see some very, temporary or light or not that expensive solutions that are potentially going to help. So for instance, we're hearing, and again, this is a classic analog non-tech, in Asia and other places that have reopened, we're hearing that they're using a particularly strong smelling cleaning agent so that people just smell that it's clean. And so I think there's going to be a lot of those types of things that come out, but there's going to be a lot of trial and error. But certainly I think going through my presentation, I think we all agree that tech is going to play a very important part as we try to get to a semi-new normal.
And we're looking forward to see my desk again. There is a comment from okay, so thank you very much for Agnès. And now Ryan is telling us that he's really curious about the data analytics. What do you think will be the most relevant data insight to help change real estate and facility leaders make operational and spatial changes?
Yeah, so I mean, beyond the recirculation data for HVAC, I think that's going to be very important. In fact, if you read the reports out of some of the more advanced reports out of South Korea or China, they're actually going back to restaurants where COVID was spread and look at the HVAC facilities in terms of the intakes and how it spread. And it actually is pretty incredible to watch that type of analysis. So I think that the flow data is going to be very important. I think that the truth is, I don't know if it's one data. I think people will look at density. I think people will look at how close people are getting to each other and trying to resolve kind of what's the max amount of people that can be in a space. I think that's going to be the initial thing, is just how are people moving in a space? How many, like, what's the max I can put in? I think this is something stores are struggling with, right? If you've gone to a grocery store and the grocery store is packed, you got to wait outside. You know, it's not really advanced analytics that's being done at the local grocery store in terms of how many people are allowed in there. And so I think it's going to be a bit of trial and error, where robotics tends to be a lot better at that, of making sure that people are staying apart, and then making sure that, analytics are better at that, and making sure people stay apart, and making sure that people understand what's the maximum occupancy of a particular space. So I think right now that's probably the near-term issue that data is going to really help with. And then inevitably, what we're going to have to do is unfortunately, I think we all agree that there are going to be, as we get back, many outbreaks probably. I think most people agree with that. I don't know. I'm not an infectious disease expert, but if there is, I think what's going to be important in the data is for people to hone in on that site and realize what happened in that site that made the spread happen, right? And they can learn from that particular case study, shut it down, and understand that, because I think that this is not something that's going away anytime soon. It's probably something we're going to have to deal with for at least a year or two. And so we really need to learn from mistakes that are happening on the ground. Much easier to learn when you have data than when you have just anecdotal evidence.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Roelof. Then specifically about fifth wall, Michelle would like to know what is, which geography, which territories is fifth wall focusing on, and how does it manage the deals flow accordingly?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I can't, just because of the kind of marketing restrictions, I can't talk about specific geographies or anything. Obviously, we're a US-based fund. You can see our portfolio. You know, we have international LPs. I think roughly 15 of our 55 are international, 40 are US-based, and we are US-based VC.
Great, thank you very much. Then, oh, so many questions for this talk. And another question from Sonner. What do you think will change in commercial real estate insurance claims process?
Sorry, could you say that last part again?
What do you think will change in commercial real estate insurance claims process?
Insurance real estate claims process?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's going to be tough. I think that you could have some automation there just with potentially the number of claims coming through, but you have to be a little careful on the commercial insurance side, because there's going to be likely a big government intervention there in terms of protecting businesses to make sure that they're not liable. But I think look, I invested in this area before. We have portfolio companies in digital insurance. It's an area that I believe very strongly in, you know, on the residential side and then increasingly on the commercial side. I do think that's going to be the case. I also think, just if you think about what's happening, I really think it's important that we break up the near-term effect on real estate and COVID, and then the long-term effect. You know, I'm hearing a lot of claims on, you know, the office is never gonna, no one's going back to the office, all this stuff. Obviously, I think the appetite for office is diminished. I think people are going to want more flexibility in the near term. But long term, we really don't know what's going to happen. And in my opinion, no one really does. At least I don't. And so I think, you know, these kind of bold predictions, I think you need to take them a bit with a grain of salt, just because long term, we really don't know what's going to happen. This isn't the first plague we've dealt with. This isn't the first virus we've dealt with as a human species. In fact, this isn't the first virus we've dealt with if you go back to Asia within the last 2 decades. So people do have a resiliency of going back to the way things were. I do think that there's a practicality standpoint. And I think what we should really be looking at is the data. So what I'm looking at is the tenant surveys. So CoreNet had a really good tenant survey, basically said 70% of corporate real estate people say that they're going to have a diminished appetite, or they're going to, you know, decrease their portfolio of office real estate in the future. So that's a good data point to go with. Now, the key then is how much of that is the secular shift from needing less office just because people are working from home, and how much of that is because of the economic considerations they're making as a company because of the uncertainty of the future. So I really think you need to figure out a way to kind of parse the signal from the noise. And I do think that you need to compartmentalize it from the post-COVID new normal and then the longer term effects that could be there. And some of those are interesting, such as, you know, a rethinking of supply chains, right? I think a lot of nations are relooking at their supply chains based on shortages. That has real implications for logistics. You may have some rethinking of density within cities, right? And maybe people going a little more to the suburbs. But again, I think you really need to compartmentalize the short term and then the long term, because it's really important to understand that.
Great, perfect answer. Thank you very much. Then we have a question from Joanne, which said that taking into consideration the accelerated digital transformation, I mean, for instance, the data management that deals with planning, regulation, functional requirements. What are your thoughts on the evolving role of designers? You want me to say it again, maybe?
Yeah, sorry, I missed the last part of that. Sorry about that.
She said that taking into consideration all this part about the digital transformation, what are your thoughts on the evolving role of designers?
Oh, designers. Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, I think the challenge a little bit for a designer is generally you're not designing a space for a 6, 12-month, 2-year period. You're generally designing it for longer than that. So I think it's a real challenge, but I think that obviously there's a lot of technology that designers use right now in terms of density that, you know, whether it's modeling technology, I think that's going to be important. I think airflow is going to be something that people think about that maybe they didn't think about before. And I think the real thing that we were moving towards anyway is flexibility. I think flexibility and resilience are going to be two of the big words that were important before COVID and just became even more important now. The flexibility of the space is going to be important. Now, there's certain hardware components to that, but then there's also software components. And I think designers now are likely going to want to build in a decent amount of flexibility into their spaces in terms of that, the inside of a building. On the outside of the building, that's a challenge, right? I mean, you can't just build a building and then change it a year later. It's you know, these are huge capital expenditures. You have to think long term. It can take 3 to 5 years to build a building, if not much longer. So it is a real challenge for architects, which is why I think you're not seeing a lot of bold predictions by architects. I think rightfully so. They're kind of stepping back, watching it, seeing what's happening, and then going forward. I think for city planners, this is the time to be super bold because you're going to have, you know, governments. I think most people agree are going to be a lot larger. They're going to have a lot of ability to do things that maybe they couldn't do before. And that's going to be amazing for urban planning. And I think it's going to be better for everybody because we can make our cities more people-centric.
Yeah, thank you for this really complete answer. It's a bit longer one, but I really like this question from François.
Okay.
The COVID showed that a lot of jobs can be done from home. But with social distancing being applied, more people have shown increasing signs of depression. With regards to tenant engagement, especially in the real estate industry, do you think that human well-being will become a metric to which real estate developments is measured by?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, stepping back for a second, I think I mentioned this on other webinars I've been on, is that I don't think that COVID really has changed anything in tech or real estate. I think it's just accelerated everything. And so wellness was something that a lot of people were looking at. We were looking at a lot of wellness technologies. The reason I know a lot about air filtration and air quality is it was something we were looking at. It was more like with our landlords, and it's more because of oxygen content in the air and less with, you know, the quality of the air from a virus perspective, but it ends up being equally important. And I do think that wellness is something that's going to be extremely important as people go back to work. It's something you're already seeing employers really struggling with. I think we all sense how kind of lonely it can get working at home, how different it is, how psychologically challenging it can be sometimes. And so I do think that there's something about us human beings, you know, millions of years of evolution doesn't change because of 6 months of working from home. And so I think that there is something about human interaction that's very important. I think it's important for innovation. I think it's important for just your well-being. And so I do think that there's going to be that. And what's interesting is I'll be interesting to see if we can get data on it, right? If we can get data on, you know, kind of a happiness index for an office or a wellness index for the actual employees, I think you're going to start seeing that because in a lot of ways, and we've talked about this, one of the trends is that real estate decisions have moved more to a human resources decision for big companies because they see it as part of talent acquisition and talent retention. You know, your workplace and how you work and how you feel in your workplace really is part of what gets you to go to a company, and it's also what makes your work well. And so in a sense, the workplace is really an investment companies make into their employees. And so I think that wellness is going to be part of it. So I absolutely do think that you'll start tracking it. I think the key then is obviously privacy. and then how to get that data anonymously. But I do think that that's a metric people will start looking at, and some have already started looking at it.
Great, thank you, and thank you very much, Francois, also for the question. A really logistic question now. There's a where do you think, where do you think the main liability and accountability lies when returning to the office? Would it be the owner, the landlord, the tenant? What is your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above. If you were asking me, Roelof, I would say it's all of the above, right? I think everyone has a stake in it. I think anyone that doesn't take it seriously is obviously going to pay the consequences in the sense of either an upset tenant who's upset then because the employees are upset, or which then obviously leads to a bad relationship, which then leads to them potentially moving to another office or not re-signing the lease. So I think all of them will hopefully will take responsibility for it. I think the days of landlords kind of being what we call kind of an absentee landlord and not checking on employees or not checking on tenants, I think are gone. I think if you're not engaging your tenants in a very proactive way right now, you're likely behind the ball and you're likely gonna suffer some consequences down the road in terms of that retention. So I think it's all of the above. From a legal standpoint, it'll be very fascinating to watch. I think it's going to depend on the country, and it may even in the U.S. depend on the state. But I do think that you're likely everyone that is kind of a future thinker is going to be paying attention to this, is going to be focused on it, all the stakeholders in there. And I think it's an opportunity for landlords to really step up and engage their tenants in a new way, engage their tenants as tenants and customers, and also to start building some brand value with their tenants.
Great, thank you very much. A last question to end the session, a bit more to take. I know you like it. How do you see the shift from real estate to home office? Will it have an increasingly impact on collaboration software that tries to emulate the workspace?
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now we're in a giant experiment, right, where we're all working from home, basically because everyone's been forced to. And if you look at a lot of the big companies, a lot of them that don't require, if it's not a manufacturing business or something like that, don't require you to go to work physically, are telling people you can work from home until the end of the year. I think that this giant experiment has surprised people in terms of the productivity that they are getting from their workers, at least initially based on the technology. And I think that has surprised people to the upside. Now, the question you have is, what is the duration of that productivity? So is that productivity consistent over time, or was it just a spurt while people thought this was interesting and new, and then they're starting to lag over time? And I think that we don't have enough data right now to realize whether that works or not. I do think that working from home will be a bigger thing after this. I think we all agree on that. I do think that people will adjust their appetites for office, but whether that means long-term less demand for office, I don't think we have enough data now to say one way or the other. I think that what will be key is flexibility. I think people want more choice and more flex. But what we're also seeing is people that are dying to go back to the office, right? They can't stand it. The other thing you have to consider also is that not everyone, I'm lucky that I have an apartment that happens to have a small office here, but not everyone has that, right? A lot of people are working out of their kitchens, they're working out of their living rooms. Not everyone has that setup. And so, if that is not going to be a long-term solution for that employee, what you could say is, okay, well, what if you subsidize that employee's rent so that they could get a bigger residential place and therefore save on office and you make up the difference? Yeah, you could do that, but obviously that's going to take a while to implement. And the question is, how much do you supplement it? So there's a lot of creative solutions. I do think we're going to run the experiment. And I think as we watch the data, I think the important things to watch on data are tenant surveys. I think watch productivity indexes. And then I also think, we're going to have to figure out kind of the health of the employee while they work from home. So I think as we watch the data and it comes out, then we'll know a little more in terms of how productive it is, et cetera. The other thing I would also tell you is keep in mind that you also have to understand the perspective of people talking. I'm not saying that companies coming out and saying, hey, maybe everyone can work from home aren't being genuine, but you have to also understand that they're also the ones trying to renegotiate leases right now. So likely when you're trying to renegotiate a lease, you're going to come out and say, I don't need as much office, right? It's within your negotiating advantage to do it. So I really think you got to focus on the data, and as the data comes out, we'll see what happens.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your time today. That was really cool to have you on this talk to answer to all these questions. And yeah, I hope everything will be all right in US soon. And yeah, but it's
Thank you too.
And thank you very much again.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I hope everything's good in Paris, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting there soon again sometime. And thanks a lot for having us. Great questions, and I really appreciate the audience joining.
Great. I hope we can see you in September for Propel Paris. Hope you can travel by. And for all the others, really happy to have you here today. We'll see you on Monday with another French session on Monday with Elliot Godet from EP with our partner French PropTech. Thank you very much and see you.